Now, you are ready.
For what?
A new beginning.
Since the very first reveal of God of War, we all immediately realized that Kratos as a character and the franchise he represents would never be the same. From the moment the player took control, we all knew God of War is back. But more importantly, God of War has changed. A series known for revolutionizing the hack-and-slash genre now features a completely new combat system. The fixed camera gives way to a free shoulder-hugging one, the iconic blades of chaos are replaced by an axe, and we now find ourselves in the unexplored realm of Norse mythology, leaving ancient Greece behind once and for all. Even more, PlayStation's famous mascot not only has grown a beard, but also something he never possessed in all the games which came before: a personality. The notorious Ghost of Sparta evolved into a multi-layered character, a Kratos who is forced to grapple with the man he once was, or still is, a Kratos who's haunted by his past actions and deeds, a Kratos who, and I never imagined myself saying this about the angriest video game character of all time, has to learn how to be a good father. This revamped God of War appears to be inspired by some of my favorite games. Games most people would have never connected to the God of War franchise. The relationship between Kratos and his son reminds an awful lot of the dynamic between Joel and Ellie or Logan and Laura. Much like Joel or Logan, Kratos has turned into an older, grizzled version of himself. People definitely have a point when they say the new God of War could have been made by Naughty Dog. The level design reminds of the Tomb Raider reboots. The focus on complex character relationships evokes Last of Us vibes, and the more personal and focused combat system appears to be inspired by Dark Souls. It's almost like they made a game specifically for me. While I've always enjoyed playing God of War, I couldn't help but feel like the franchise isn't living up to its full potential. God of War is already great, but it could be so much better. In my opinion, God of War's change of direction finally unlocks the true potential of the franchise. However, I'm aware of the fact that many people would disagree with my assessment. As a result of all these radical changes, many people can't help but ask the question: is this still God of War? It seems like an easy question, but believe me when I say the answer is more complex than you might think. Before we attempt to answer this question, we first have to figure out why Santa Monica found it necessary to change the series so drastically in the first place. Why did God of War change?
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
The first God of War marked a pivotal point for PlayStation. It added an unmissable and for the time absolutely mind-blowing action game revelation, which could only be experienced on Sony's console. Santa Monica turned from a no-name studio to a household name, henceforth associated with incredible production values. The idea was simple. David Jaffe imagined a game that would combine the action-packed, fast-paced combat style of hack-and-slash titles like Devil May Cry and the epic backdrop of Greek mythology. God of War's visceral and energetic combat system was a perfect fit for the massive proportions featured in the ancient myths. On his quest, Kratos cut his way through the greatest gods, heroes and creatures in the pantheon of Greek mythology, accompanied by a film-like presentation no game could rival. Kratos became a Sony mascot, and God of War was treated as PlayStation's poster boy title, making a sequel inevitable. A franchise was born.
Zeus! Your son has returned. I bring the destruction!
With each new game, the series outperformed its previous entry by adding even larger set pieces and pitting Kratos against even greater and more powerful opponents. Throughout 2 console generations, the developers tried to raise the stakes again and again, until the story reached its ultimate climax with God of War 3, which concluded the revenge quest of Kratos in the most epic way imaginable. But where do you go from there? In terms of scale and spectacle, that's as far as it gets. God of War 3, much like Uncharted 3, maneuvered itself into a corner by cranking the action up to 11, leaving no room for improvement. Kratos literally fights on top of and against mountains. Fucking mountains. You want fast-paced action, mind-blowing boss fights and the hack-and-slash genre brought to its most extreme conclusion? Look no further than God of War 3, because that's as far as you can go. Unfortunately, it could only go downhill from there. At the end of God of War 3, ancient Greece is swept clean. His foes ripped to shreds during his rampage, Kratos massacred the Olympian gods along with each and every creature Greek mythology had to offer. There were no options left. God of War 3 exploited its inspirational source to a point of no return, and the incredible presentation of the game seemed unbeatable. God of War 3 was the pinnacle of the hack-and-slash genre. For that reason, God of War Ascension was handed an ungrateful task: blow people away with epic boss fights and set pieces in a post-God of War 3 world. Well, unsurprisingly, Ascension couldn't find a way to overcome such sky-high expectations. The developers were left with no option but to make a prequel, since they had nowhere else to go. Despite being one of the most graphically advanced games of the last console generation, introducing an online mode and yet again featuring stunning set pieces and boss fights, fans and critics alike couldn't shake off the sense that the series had run its course. Even though Ascension maintained the high production quality Santa Monica is known for, many people felt like there was nothing left to discover. Sales numbers confirmed that interest for the franchise was on an obvious decline. God of War Ascension moved a mere 360,000 copies at launch, whereas God of War 3 sold more than 1 million copies. Ultimately, God of War became a victim of its own success, like so many franchises before it. All of a sudden, the God of War series was faced with a difficult decision: go into retirement or completely re-evaluate everything the franchise stands for. In short, evolve or die. In order to truly surprise and intrigue people again, in order to gain back relevance, the entire formula had to change. Either that, or you let Kratos rest once and for all. As we all know by now, God of War chose to adapt. God of War has changed, but are these changes beneficial for the franchise? Is this reimagined Kratos the best step forward? God of War is in a weird place, since the game looks and feels completely different top to bottom, clearly indicating we are dealing with a reboot. At the same time, the story is a direct continuation of Kratos' story. Even more, judging by the footage we've seen thus far, the events of previous God of War titles will play a vital role in the game as Kratos tries to come to terms with his violent past and wants to prevent his son from making the same mistakes. So what exactly is the new God of War? Not calling it a reboot would feel silly given the profound changes, yet the narrative is still connected to the overall story arc. Maybe we can settle on the terms soft reboot or simply reimagining and revival. Here's where it gets complicated. Having a look at franchises which successfully reimagined themselves, one has to conclude that what works for one franchise might not necessarily work for the other. Just compare id Software's Doom reboot to Resident Evil 4. One is a straight reboot, the other one is technically a direct sequel, but everyone who played Resident Evil 4 knows that it definitely almost feels like a reboot. What both games have in common is that they were met with positive feedback from fans and critics. Yet the reason why Doom is considered a brilliant revival is completely different from the strategy behind Resident Evil 4. Doom was deemed a successful revival of the franchise because it returned to the roots of the series. Disregarding all modern first-person shooter trends, its software decided to bring back the fast-paced, aggressive FPS gameplay of old. Resident Evil 4 introduced a couple of drastic changes, like a seamless cinematic presentation, a camera more up close and personal, context-sensitive controls, and overall more action-oriented approach. So I'll ask again, what makes a great reboot? Well, it depends on the individual franchise. There are different ways to revitalize a declining series. To return to my original question, in light of the new direction God of War is taking, is this still God of War? Much like the question, what makes a great reboot, depends on the individual franchise, this question depends on how you personally define God of War. What makes God of War special for you? Is it the violence, gore and bloodshed? Is it the energetic hack and slash gameplay? What about the puzzles? Maybe the ancient Greek setting? Is it only one of those? Is it all? The sum of its parts? Whether this reimagined version of God of War still feels like God of War and keeps the most important aspects intact is a question you'll have to answer on your own. For me, God of War is defined by its ability to make you feel like you are part of a legend in the making. Sony Santa Monica found a way to adapt the epic nature of mythology to the video game medium. As much as I admired the spectacle and combat of the old games, I always perceived God of War as a franchise whose true potential is suppressed by Kratos himself. Rarely has there been a protagonist as bland and one-dimensional as Kratos. The first game still gave the impression that we were merely at the beginning of an arc, a character about to evolve. Yet that arc never came. Kratos was angry and he would get even angrier. Full stop.
I will have my revenge!
At any rate, if you like it or not, God of War's drastic change was inevitable. After Ascension, Santa Monica was left with a choice. Do you continue to make the same game over and over again to please your rapidly dwindling hardcore fanbase, until you release the first game that is a critical and commercial flop? Or do you hit the brakes once you notice an obvious decline of popularity and interest? One thing is for sure, if the God of War series wouldn't have evolved, it would have died. This fresh new reimagining of God of War at least offers the possibility of success. A reboot represents a chance, whereas the stubborn continuation of the same old formula can only end in certain death. Whether you like the vision of bearded Kratos or not, you gotta admit, after God of War 3, Santa Monica pretty much exhausted the established God of War formula. But I don't think there's any right or wrong in this debate. Understandably, some hardcore God of War veterans aren't pleased with the drastic changes. They expected to see something familiar, and instead they got something very different. History shows whenever an iconic franchise receives a radical makeover, some people outright despise it and feel betrayed in a way, while others who never really cared about the franchise suddenly get on board. You win some, you lose some. Ideally, you win more people over than you lose, otherwise the whole idea behind the reboot is kind of pointless. If you are a die-hard proponent of the old God of War formula, you have every right to be disappointed. I can certainly think of franchises near and dear to my heart I would not want to change as profoundly as God of War. As harsh as it sounds, I also can't pretend like I feel sorry for you guys, because this God of War finally appears to be the God of War I always wanted to play. Santa Monica took a bunch of my favorite games of all time and merged them with the God of War universe. For now, we have to reserve any final judgment until the game hits the shelves. All in all, God of War's new identity is a meaningful, but more importantly, a necessary turning point for the entire franchise. In a couple of weeks, we will know if it paid off.
Can you kill something that big?
As always, thank you guys a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave behind a like and subscribe to my channel. I'd also like to know your opinion regarding God of War's drastic changes. Feel free to tell me in the comments section. See you next time.